This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
I honestly think every player who ultimately comes, they're all going to be in it and ready to go, because if for no other reason, competitiveness will take over. You don't make the NBA if you're not a competitive guy. That's just, that's a fallacy that I think sometimes fans like to throw out there. Is, this guy just doesn't care. It's not true. So I think, that'll take over ultimately when this season restarts.
That was Keith Smith yesterday on the Sports Bash. You're on 97.3 ESPN, Yahoo Sports, NBA. Keith Smith is from. Of course, we'll be hearing from him a lot over the weeks about what's going on with the NBA as they return to play later this month. We got a lot to get into with the NBA, the Sixers, and more. I'm Josh Hennig. This is the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Text board is open for you at 609-403-0973. Bryan Toporek, co-host of the NBA pod, also from Bleacher Report. Join us coming up. 125, talk more NBA and Sixers. And as we inch closer and closer to the resumption of action in the NBA, I'm finding it more and more interesting how varying the opinions are of people about something that, frankly, none of us have really an educated opinion on. And that's really what it comes down to. We're at a point with sports now that it's been so long since we've actually watched the Sixers play. It's been so long since we've watched any of these teams actually get on the court and perform that our opinions are becoming more and more jaded from reality. Listen, I'll admit it. There are days that I jump online, I read stories, and I read reactions, and I just got to put my phone down, or I got to just change the tab on my computer browser, because I see things every day that make me realize that, frankly, people's ability to be objective anymore. And I don't know, maybe this is a side effect of, the pandemic. Maybe people are just stir crazy. Maybe people are just losing their minds. But it feels like the further we go along, the ability for people to be objective is just going further and further away. And that's why I love what Keith Smith said yesterday on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill, because he talked about a bunch of different things. And about the Sixers, he brought up something that I think, again, that we haven't touched on enough, and something that I've talked about here on 97.3 ESPN. Mike Gill has talked about, Hunter Brody has talked about, but frankly, I don't find enough people really diving deep enough into. This was Keith Smith yesterday.
I think these 8 seeding games are going to be interesting, because I think they're going to use those to kind of try and work some things out. They clearly have to work Ben Simmons back in and figure those things out. So I think this training camp and those 8 seeding games are as important for Philadelphia to figure out exactly what they want to be at the start of the playoffs as they are for any team that is restarting this season.
They got to work Ben Simmons back in. These 8 games are going to be important. The Sixers have not had the same lineup together on the court for more than 20 games during the season before the season shut down. That means that the 76ers, who played about 65 games this year, less than a quarter of those games did they have the same lineup together. You know what that says to me? That says to me that, frankly, people's opinions about this team are all going to be correct and incorrect at the same time. You cannot tell me that the Sixers are definitively one thing or another. It's like the conversation we had yesterday. I had people texting in yesterday, and I love you guys when you text in. I love it when you disagree because it provides great opportunities for discussion for all of us. You have one opinion, I have another opinion, that we can come together and figure out, where the middle ground is. That's having a conversation. Well, here's the problem. I bring up a point about Joel Embiid, and what do I get a text message about? Well, Joel Embiid, all he does is eat Chick-fil-A. You act like eating Chick-fil-A is the equivalent of eating pizza for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. See, we ignore the fact that when it comes to getting on the basketball court, as Keith Smith said, these guys are competitors. These guys are players who are going to go out there and do their best to win. There's a perception at times that athletes, professional athletes, are not professional athletes. There's a reason why you get to that level. And that's why I love what Keith Smith said. When the games get started, these are all competitors. We act like when the games get started, Joel Embiid has the same mentality as the dude at the local summer league. Absolutely, positively not. So let's be objective instead of subjective. Objectively, the 76ers are the biggest wild card entering this NBA bubble. The 76ers are the one team that absolutely we don't know 100% for sure what we're going to get. I have zero total confirmation or affirmation or surety that when Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, Tobias Harris, and the rest of this team are back on the court later this month to start scrimmaging and then resume games, the first game being August 1st, that the 76ers are going to be anything that you or I expect. Now, it's great for debate, it's great for conversation. But when the immediate reaction is so hyper one direction or another, positive or negative, you can't make that affirmation because we haven't seen these guys for 4 months. 4 months is the equivalent of an offseason. Something that Mike Gill has mentioned multiple times on the Sports Bash. We're basically getting a mini season after a basically forced off season due to the pandemic. So what are things that we actually know about the 76ers? What are some things we actually can wrap our head around legitimately? Well, as I played the clip there, Keith Smith said it. The Sixers are going to need these 8 games more than any other team in the NBA because this Sixers team has to figure out what their lineup is. They have to figure out their rotations. They have to figure out how they're actually going to play together, how they're going to make all the pieces fit. The Sixers are the one team that we just don't know about. And on one hand, it's incredibly exciting because the potential is extremely high. But on the other hand, it's incredibly venturing into the unknown because I've seen pictures of Ben Simmons. I don't know what it means. Joel Embiid says that he's in good shape and he's ready to go. But what does that really mean? Until we see them on the court, we may not know. Now, one thing we do know for sure is that the 76ers may end up playing the Boston Celtics. And if they make it into the second and third rounds, they're probably going to play the Bucks somewhere along the way. And as I've mentioned before here on 97.3 ESPN, I'm concerned about the guards in the Eastern Conference. I'm concerned about who's going to match up with Kemba Walker, who's going to match up with Eric Bledsoe, who's going to match up with the perimeter guys around the Eastern Conference. And Keith Smith drove this point home. If the Sixers play the Celtics in a series, for example, the Celtics and the Sixers just don't have an answer for arguably the most important player on each team.
Boston doesn't have a real great answer for Joel Embiid, but Philly doesn't have a real great answer for Kemba Walker on that end of the floor. So yeah, it's going to be curious to see how they both try to defend each other.
It is curious how they defend each other, but I have an answer for it. The answer is put a lineup out there that can play defense. There's no way the Sixers are going to be able to outgun a team. This is not the Houston Rockets, okay? This is not a team that is a vaunted powerhouse offensively. I'm concerned about what happens when the Sixers go up against teams that have dudes who can get their own shot consistently, guys who can score consistently offensively. Just as much as other teams don't have a guy who can consistently stop Joel Embiid, historically the Sixers have not had a guy who can stop the majority of the perimeter players in the Eastern Conference. Ben Simmons can only guard one guy at a time. Sorry to disappoint you. And Tobias Harris is an above-average defender. He's not on the Ben Simmons level defensively. So whoever Ben Simmons locks down on the Bucks, the Celtics, the Heat, or whatever team in the playoffs, Raptors, that leaves somebody else that has to be guarded. And for a team like the Celtics that have Kemba Walker, a team like the Raptors have Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, a team like the Miami Heat who have Jimmy Butler, but they also have Kendrick Nunn. They also have Goran Dragic coming off the bench. They have a lot of different weapons throughout you. Oh, by the way, I have no idea what Andre Iguodala is going to look like coming back for the Heat. If he comes back and he's the Iguodala from the Warriors days, that's going to be a lot of trouble for teams in the Eastern Conference. The Milwaukee Bucks, yeah, they have Giannis, but even if you quote-unquote slow down Giannis, what about George Hill, Eric Bledsoe, Chris Middleton, Brooke, I shoot threes now, Lopez? What do you do with those guys? If the Sixers are going to have a chance, and we know for sure that we don't know what version of these guys we're going to get, the one objective thing I know, and you know, and anybody who's watched the Sixers knows, is that when this team wants to play defense, watch out. When this team actually shows up and puts their best foot forward to play defense, that is where they have a chance. And that makes it even more important for certain guys to step up. Because we already have an idea of what you're getting on the defensive end from Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. So then the question remains, what about the other three positions? Shake Milton, Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris. Whatever many minutes Al Horford gets, whether he starts or comes off the bench or is part of the fourth quarter stopper lineup, all of those guys are going to be integral, all four of them, in the success of this team. Because what is something that we know for a fact? Championship teams are not made just because of a couple superstars. The Miami Heat don't beat the Spurs in that one NBA Finals without Ray Allen. That shot was huge. And by the way, it wasn't the only big shot that he had in that playoff run. People overlooked that the Miami Heat went through stretches of that playoff run when they beat the Spurs. Chris Bosh had that injured groin. So other guys had to step up. When you look back on the team that beat the Miami Heat the first time that they were together, the Big Three, it was a team that played very well together. The Dallas Mavericks. It wasn't just Dirk that beat them. It wasn't because they had an elderly Jason Kidd. It wasn't just because they had Tyson Chandler. It's because J.J. Barea went nuts. So to me, for the Sixers, I know you can play defense. So that's what you got to do. You got to use these 8 games to go out there and figure out what is the best version of this basketball team that's going to put you in a position to win a championship. And as Keith Smith said yesterday on the Sports Bash about Shake Milton, he has an important role potentially in this offense.
What he gives them is another guy who can create offense off the dribble. They just don't have enough guys who can do that. It's Ben Simmons, then Tobias Harris a little bit, Josh Richardson every once in a while, and that's about it. And that's where they really struggle. And in the playoffs, because you're going to see a team somewhere between 4 and 7 games, they know what your stuff is. They know what you're going to run. They know what you like to go to for your action. So what those teams do is they can very or much more easily take those away from you. So you need somebody who can create something out of nothing, and Milton gives them that ability.
By the way, can we first talk about the point where he just kind of like lukewarmly gives Tobias Harris credit for maybe being able to create offense off the dribble? I thought that was actually pretty funny. But seriously though, Shake Milton is a guy who could have a huge impact on this team. The first day that he started playing consistently for the 76ers this season was January 22nd. From January 22nd to the last day the Sixers played before the pandemic shutdown, March 11th, he was an impact role player when Ben Simmons was playing or when Ben Simmons was not playing. He was giving you the ability to space the floor, 51% from three. He was a contributor on defense, averaging about a steal per game. He was a contributor in putting points on the board, averaging double-digit points. If the Sixers role guys don't step up, if they don't get the best out of the Shake Miltons and the Josh Richardsons and others, this team isn't going far in the playoffs. And for all the frustration, for all the aggravation that we have had with this team, not just this year, but over the last couple of years, the confidence that we can have in this team is that everyone steps up, this team has a chance to win. And if they play defense, they have a chance to be in any game against any team, any night. That is what we know for sure. Question is, what version of these players are we going to get? That's the great unknown. But that's personally what I'm excited about. I'm excited about the fact that there is a great unknown with this basketball team. There's a great empty unknown that has to be filled. And this bubble is going to be the ultimate test of the real professionals versus the guys who are just not mature enough. I played you the cuts from Joel Embiid yesterday. He said it himself. I'm going to do what I have to do. All I do is go play basketball, go home and play video games. The team that does basically that goes and works out, does the training, and that's it. Those are the teams that are going to be in the position to win a championship. It's the teams that have guys whose heads are not in the game, whose guys who are saying, I don't know if I really want to stay in my room. I don't know if playing golf and ping pong in video games are good enough for me. It's those guys who don't appreciate the opportunity they've been given in this 22-team bubble. The guys that take the risks, the guys who are, as Joel Embiid says, more adventurous than he is. Those are the guys, those are the teams, those are the players that are going to not make it far in this playoff bubble. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. Reminder, coming up at 125, Bryan Toporek will join us to talk more Sixers and NBA. 609-403-0973. Texter chimes in and says, Sixers have to find more minutes for Thibault if they want to play defense. Listen, man, I'm with you. I've actually suggested that maybe they should even consider playing Thibault in the starting lineup potentially and have Josh Richards come off the bench to give them a punch offensively off the bench, because Richardson's going to give you more offense than he's going to give you compared to Thibault at least. Josh Richardson is more of a known commodity, shall we call it, offensively than Thibault is. But I'm with you. I need to see more Thibault out there. And I think the Sixers are going to use the scrimmage games as well as these 8 games to figure out who's going to play the most minutes coming off the bench, because they got a lot of questions that need to be figured out. You think about the guys who are the other guys on this team, who are not the primaries. Furkan Korkmaz, Matisse Thybulle, Mike Scott. You sign Ryan Broekhoff. Does he ever get any run? You think about all the different guys who are going to come off the bench potentially for this team. How many of them are actually going to get major minutes? I don't think Brett, if he doesn't have to, is going to go beyond 10 guys deep. He's never shown a real penchant to do that. There's a track record with Brett Brown. And part of Brett Brown's track record is he's not one of these coaches who uses every single dude on the bench every night. Some nights he goes 8 deep. Some nights he goes 10 deep, depending on the situation, depending on the matchup, depending on who gets in foul trouble. But Brett traditionally sticks with the guys that he feels are going to put the team in the best position to be successful. And we're going to find out real quickly what contribution Thybulle can make for this basketball team, because I think the Sixers are going to put a lot of these guys out there and say, let's see what happens. We know Horford's getting minutes. Whether he's a starter or he comes off the bench, he's going to get his minutes. The question is, who's going to get the minutes next to him? I don't have a guarantee that Mike Scott is going to be getting as many minutes as maybe we previously thought, because what if Brett Brown decides to mix and match starters with bench players? Maybe a little bit more they did in the past. What is it? Is it something where the Sixers say Joel Embiid gets a break when Horford comes in, but Simmons stays on the floor? Josh Richardson, Simmons, Tobias Harris, Horford finish out the first quarter. Start of the second quarter, maybe Embiid, Horford, Richardson, Shake Milton, and then maybe Furkan Korkmaz. There's a lot of variations, a lot of flexibility you have this lineup, and you got to put those lineups out there based on who you're playing. If you're playing a team like Milwaukee, you need a little bit more length. You need a little bit more Al Horford at times on the court. But maybe against a team like Boston, even though it's Horford's former team, if they go a little bit of small ball more often, if they go a Kemba Walker, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and then maybe, one of the big men like Theus or Cantor in the middle, I don't know if Horford's the best option to go against that lineup. So I think that we also have to factor in how the matchups are going to factor in. And I'm agree with you, Texter. I think Thybulle can be an important factor in playing defense against all those lineups. The question is, does Brett Brown have enough confidence in Thybulle's offense? I think that's where the rub is going to be. I think the Sixers are going to try to find the guys who can contribute the most on both ends of the floor. Selfishly, I don't care about Thybulle's offense. I think that the other players can do that, but I'm not the basketball coach. I don't have a specific philosophy that I'm trying to make work in an NBA bubble in 8 games. They have to go to the playoffs. I'm just sitting here behind a microphone watching the games. I got my opinion. I got to tell you what I think should happen, but I think Brett Brown has shown us over the years, as any NBA coach, that he has certain tendencies when it comes to his lineups. There's a reason why a couple of years ago he played Bellinelli as much as he did, even though Bellinelli wasn't giving you much defensively, because when it comes to guys like Bellinelli and Redick, he has a great value for guys who can spread the floor. So if Thybulle can't consistently hit threes, there's a possibility you see maybe a little bit more of Furkan Korkmaz than you maybe previously thought. Coming up next, we'll talk more NBA with Bryan Toporek here on 97.3 ESPN. I want to remind you that 97.3 ESPN has teamed up with Seize the Deal for incredible weekly offers from some fantastic local restaurants. And this week's big deal is you can get a $25 gift card, good, for use at both Yuri's Waterfront Restaurant, and the Boathouse Restaurant at the foot of the bridge in Wildwood for just $12.50. That's right, a $25 gift card for just $12.50. And you can get this great deal starting tomorrow at 9 a.m. at seizethedeal.com. For more information, go check it out on the 97.3 ESPN app. Josh Hennig back here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text in just a bit at 609-403-0973. As promised, joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, he's the co-host of the NBA Pod, quality editor for Bleacher Report, and contributor for Forbes Sports. He is Bryan Toporek, and as all guests, he joins us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Bryan, how you doing today?
Doing well, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate you jumping on. Before we get into any specifics, I got to know from you, because as these teams start matriculating down there, we know that there's been a long time off. I know one of the things that you and your co-host Morton have talked about in the NBA pod is some of the what-ifs. What is the biggest what-if for you when it comes to what we're actually going to see on the floor? Because I feel like one of the things that we've been talking about here is that we don't know exactly what version of these players we're going to get when they get back on the court.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is by far the biggest what if, because we can't, we assume when the season went on hiatus in mid-March, there was a pretty clear tier of the Bucks and the two LA teams had separated themselves from everyone else as the top tier championship contenders. And then there were some other teams in that second tier, Boston, Toronto, Denver, Houston, Philly on certain nights. But, I think it was pretty clear that those three were the clear favorites. Now, 4.5 months later, we don't know, who had access to a basketball net at their house. Some guys said they didn't pick up a ball for a couple months, and it's the longest they've gone without picking one up. So, yeah, what physical condition they're in and how quickly they can get back into basketball shape in terms of their fitness, but then also who can reestablish the chemistry they had going on back in March. Who can do that the most quickly will, I think, go a long way toward determining how far a lot of these teams go.
Also, what about new chemistry? A team like the 76ers, they only played 19, 20 games with one lineup this year. A team like the Miami Heat, they got to work in Andre Iguodala somehow, some way. I'm not even fully sure what's going on with Boston's big man rotation anymore, because I feel like I've seen a ton of Enes Kanter more in the last 2 months out and about than I saw him on a basketball court for the previous 2 months before that. So, what does this say about also the chemistry that has to be made for the teams that have questions about their rotations?
Yeah, that's a big part of what these three scrimmages before the seeding games start and the 8 seeding games. I think there are a lot of teams with a lot of questions that need to be answered about their best rotation moving forward going into playoffs. And the tricky thing is, you make these trades at the trade deadline in February and you expect to have 2 months to really work these guys in before you get to the important playoff games. Well, now there was a very limited sample size before the season went on hiatus, and now basically every team's back to square one. So you've got basically 8 games to figure out, from the Sixers' perspective, how do Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III fit into the rotation, if at all? And then, a guy like Shake Milton, who is really coming on strong in February and March. Does he keep that momentum up? Does he need to start from square one as well? There's a lot on Brett Brown's plate in particular, going from the Sixers' perspective.
Let's hit on that specifically. You brought up a couple very interesting names, Alec Burks and Glenn Robinson III. I'm working off the assumption, whether it's only mostly based on what we've seen from Brett Brown, that he's only going to go about maybe 8-10 deep on any given night. So I'm assuming that there's going to be someone left out of the mix between Burks, Robinson, Korkmaz, Thibault, Mike Scott. It feels like there's going to have to be someone left out of the mix, because it looks like Horford is going to not be a guy who's going to even start some night, depending on the matchup. So, how do you think this is going to play out with all of these other pieces?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot depends on what Brett Brown decides to do with the starting 5. I think clearly Simmons, Embiid, Josh Richardson, Tobias Harris, they're going to be locked in. Does he bring Horford back into the starting five, or, right before the season went out, he was tinkering with bringing Horford off the bench. Does Shake Milton start as the nominal point guard, even though he and Ben Simmons will start split ball handling duties? If that's the case, Alec Burks probably gets locked into the rotation just because he's going to be the only other backup point guard they have. If Horford starts, Milton comes off the bench. Burks probably has his minutes cut if he's not completely excised from the rotation. A guy like Mike Scott's really struggled for a lot of the season. But I think just because he has the chemistry with these teammates over the last year and a half, he probably will get more minutes than you would have thought going, back into March. And you were thinking like, oh man, Mike Scott might be out of the rotation come playoffs. So I think he's probably locked in. It'll be really interesting to see guys like Milton, Thibault, even Korkmaz, who just didn't really get a ton of opportunity until this year. Usually when you have a couple months off, the off seasons when you have, for young players in particular, you can make some big strides forward. So like this, even though they couldn't play organized basketball, does the game slow down for Thibault at all? Does he become aware of some of the mistakes that put him into Brett Brown's doghouse throughout the year, and does he cut those out? Because if so, the defensive aptitude that he brings probably gets him a rotation spot. So I think it's really too early to predict how the rotation is going to shake out, because I think that, Brett even said it. He said that the 8 seeding games are going to go a long way to determine who's in, who's out, how much these guys play together.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on the Boardwalk Hunter Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at @BToporek. NBA pod co-host, quality editor for Bleacher Report, also contributor for Forbes Sports. Bryan, I've been saying now for weeks, and this is just my opinion, I'm obviously not an NBA coach, but I think the Sixers' key is, I think if they go heavy on the defense and play a guy like Thibault a lot of minutes, go all in on, our goal is to slow down everybody, and that allows our offense to catch up. To me, that's the strategy to go with. Is that, though, the right mindset for the Sixers?
Definitely, 100%. That's what, going into the year, they were saying we need to have an elite defense, and that's going to fuel everything for us. Their offense left a lot to be desired for much of the year, and they can't totally ignore that. But, they're the most efficient when they're in transition versus the half court. So if they play lockdown defense, that's going to open up more transition opportunities, whether it's, forcing steals, blocking shots, or just forcing misses and getting to run out before opposing defenses can get set. So, yeah, they need to make their identity defense first and the offense will follow, which, we saw that against the Raptors in last year's playoffs. Defense was what fueled them to that 7-game series.
Joel Embiid finally spoke this week, Bryan, and I think one of the things that stood out to me at least was the amount of times that he said, I'm committed, I owe it to my teammates, I want to represent my city, I want to win a championship, I want to get back to dominating. It seems to me that Joel Embiid is very, very serious about the kind of basketball and the reason why he's playing basketball on the court.
Yeah, it was funny to see his comments come out right after there was a story on ESPN this week about Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell and their relationship, and how, Gobert is getting frustrated because he doesn't get as many touches as he would like. And then here you have Embiid coming out and saying, the offense needs to flow through me. Now, Joel Embiid is a far more talented offensive player than Rudy Gobert, who is mostly limited to putbacks and shots right around the hoop. So, the offense should be going through Embiid more than it is Gobert. But yeah, it's nice to see Embiid in the mindset of, he was rounding into form. He was very inconsistent for much of the year, but we saw in the All-Star game, and then coming out of the All-Star break, he said that kind of gave him the motivation, all right, we're in March, playoffs are right around the corner. I need to get back into the mindset of, I'm the best damn player on the floor, and no one can stop me. And when he's playing like that and everyone is playing off of him, that gives the Sixers a pretty good shot against any team on any given night.
With that being said, you just said Sixers have a chance against any team any given night. But how much of a chance do you really give them versus the other teams in the Eastern Conference?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. I mean, I guess it ultimately comes down to, do these count as home or road games? I'm not sure, because the home-road splits were not ideal this year. But I will say, I think their ceiling, going into the year, we thought it was going to be Bucks and Sixers at the top of the East. And then, Boston, Toronto, Indiana, Miami were going to be in that second tier. Clearly, that is not how it shook out. The Sixers were woefully inconsistent for most of the year. They still have the ceiling in them. Will they get it for an entire 7-game series? I don't know. I would bet not. More likely not than yes. But I think they do have the potential to get out of the East. I would say realistically, they're probably going to be a second-round knockout again. But if they can somehow, if they stay at the 6th seed and avoid the Bucks until the conference finals, could they beat Boston and Toronto? Yes. Could they beat Miami? Yes. Their best-case scenario would be somehow Miami either falls to the 6th or they get into a first-round matchup with Indiana in some way, because with Victor Oladipo out, I think, of the top 6 teams in the East, that's the one you would really like. Are they going to have the opportunity to move up or down enough for that to happen? Probably not. I think realistically, they're probably, best case scenario, is a second round exit. But if everything fell completely right and they dodged the Bucks until the conference finals, I could see them going on a deeper run than anyone would have expected in mid-March.
All right, let's go down that rabbit hole then, because you opened that door mentioning that about them going out in the second round. I would assume that going on the second round would mean an end for the Brett Brown tenure. But, Bryan, what does that mean for the rest of the roster? Because, listen, this team was built with the intention of making a playoff run and beating the Bucks and doing X, Y, Z. So going out in the second round, what do you think that equals for the roster then?
Yeah, it's really tough to say until we know the full scope of how much money the NBA loses and what the salary cap looks like next year. I know the popular refrain would be trade Al Horford for whoever you can get. Buddy Hield and Chris Paul are the popular answers, but I think that is, you'd have to include a lot to get either guy. But if the salary cap falls as drastically as it could, no team's going to want Tobias Harris or Al Horford. Those contracts are just too onerous, both in terms of size and years left, that the Sixers realistically don't have the assets to offload either player. So I think a lot of people want to see some drastic shakeup to the roster. I'm somewhat skeptical that it's going to happen. I think, if anything, to get off of Horford, maybe you also have to trade Josh Richardson, who can become a free agent after the 2020-2021 season, just because at a certain point, especially, even if the cap wasn't going to fall, it was going to be very financially prohibitive to keep this starting lineup together beyond next season. Now, with the possibility or the likelihood that the NBA is going to lose a lot of money, both because they canceled a lot of games this season and fans may not be able to attend games at all next season. I just don't necessarily think there are going to be a lot of teams rushing out to acquire Al Horford, unfortunately.
Let's talk about a couple other things around the NBA before I let you go. I feel like we're in the twilight zone because the Nets decided to replace losing over 46 points per game between 4 different players with Jamal Crawford and Michael Beasley.
Yeah. Look, the Nets are dead in the water as soon as they get to Orlando. It's honestly, I don't even know why they're sending a team there at this point. But, hey, at least it'll be entertaining when they get swept in the first round. That's the best I got for the Nets.
I never thought in my life, I'm not against the guys opting out. Obviously, Dinwiddie, there's health situation. Jordan, there's a health situation. Chandler, he has concerns. I'm all for guys, if they feel they need to opt out, I get it. but you literally are losing 46 points. And by the way, the Wizards are losing Bradley Beal too because they're worried about his shoulder, which I don't understand why 4 months wouldn't heal his shoulder, but I digress. It just feels like that the bottom of the Eastern standings is literally just going to turn into complete mush.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's disgusting. I mean, the NBA right now, knowing what's happened to the Nets and the Wizards, I'm sure they regret not just like reseeding 1 through 16 and putting Pelicans into the East and, whatever. Like the Pelicans and Blazers, the fact that probably 2 of those teams, between them and the Grizzlies, 2 of those teams are going to miss the playoffs, and 2 of the Nets, Magic, and Wizards are going to make the playoffs is terrible. So, yeah, I mean, congratulations to the Milwaukee Bucks. Giannis doesn't even have to play in the first round, and they're still going to sweep.
I mean, Memphis is close enough to the Eastern Conference. You could have just moved them over to the Eastern Conference for a temporary realignment anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, anything to spare us from a Bucks Nets or Bucks Wizards first round series without Bradley Beal or with Jamal Crawford taking 50 shots a game.
You mentioned the cluster of teams near the bottom. Of those teams, the Pelicans, the Blazers, the Grizzlies, who do you really have the most confidence in to come out of the gate firing? Because we know that the biggest key for this 8-game stretch run is you got to get off on the court and you got to get off hot because a couple losses could potentially doom you.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing for the Grizzlies is that they have such a lead over all of those other teams that even if they fall back into the pack a little bit, they're still more likely than not going to be in that play-in tournament, and they will probably be the 8 seed, so they'll only need to win 1 game, whereas the 9 will need to win 2. So if you're asking me who I think is going to get the 8 seed in the West, I would still just say the Grizzlies just because the format favors them so much. But, I mean, look, the Pelicans were really starting to look good with Zion, and, I mean, we saw the pictures circulating recently. As you said, he looks like the Colossus right now. He's absolutely terrifying. So, if I had to bet who's going to force that play-in tournament with Memphis, it's probably going to be New Orleans.
That's a shame because I would love to see Dame Lillard make the playoffs and be that team that kind of like that just shakes up the whole world because they get in there and make life miserable, like a 7-game series with the Lakers in the first round. I mean, that would just be so juicy. But I can only dream, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the loss of Trevor Ariza really hurts them. Just because, I mean, he was their best defensive wing presence. Like, Carmelo is now going to have to slide down and play the 3, which I do not feel especially great about. Nurkic is coming back, which is great, and Zach Collins is coming back, but both of them are going to have a lot of rust to shake off and not much time to do it. So, yeah, I mean, it's basically going to be the Dame show, and maybe he can do it. I hope he can, because he's one of the most entertaining players in the NBA, but I think the Pelicans' depth is really going to be their greatest asset. I think really the depth is going to be one of the greatest assets for any team that can throw out credibly like 8 to 10 players on a given night and actually have them make meaningful contributions, just given how weird this season is going to be. The possibility, I know a lot of teams are worried about soft tissue issues or injuries popping up. God forbid the bubble pops and someone gets COVID and is out for a week. The herd can thin out pretty quickly. So I think a team like the Pelicans that is as deep as it is, that will be to their benefit.
Well, we know one thing, and you use the word weird. Sometimes weird can cause a lot of entertainment. I'm looking forward to when the NBA returns. I know you are as well. He's Bryan Toporek. Check out the NBA pod. He's the co-host. Also check out his work with Forbes Sports. Also, he's the quality editor for Bleacher Report. Bryan, appreciate the time today. I know we'll be talking soon as the NBA slowly inches back to getting back actual games on the court.
Yes, sir. Thanks as always for having me on, and be well.
You too, Bryan. Take care of yourself. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Back to your text messages. Come in next. We'll wrap up the hour. 609-403-0973. Lead up to Sports Bash with Mike Gill. They got more NBA coming up today at 3 o'clock with Daryl Reynolds for a Thursday at 3 p.m. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Final segment of the warm-up. I want to remind you that 97.3 ESPN is teamed up with Seize the Deal. Incredible weekly offers every week. This is now the third week of these deals. And you know what the cool part is? If you get one deal one week, you get another deal the next week. And this week's big deal is actually almost identical to last week. $25 gift card for use at both Yuri's Waterfront Restaurant and the Boathouse Restaurant at the foot of the bridge in Wildwood for $12.50. That's right, half price. $25 gift card for $12.50. Two great restaurants in Wildwood, Yuri's Waterfront Restaurant and the Boathouse for the bridge in Wildwood. This deal goes live tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at seizethedeal.com. Another great opportunity for you to be local. Take your business and stay local. Don't go to the local chain food, drive-through, fill in the blank name brand. No, the local businesses do an amazing job, and many times they're actually better, tastier, and better service than the name brands. Yuri's Waterfront Restaurant and the Boathouse Restaurant at the foot of the bridge in Wildwood. $25 for just $12.50. Deal goes live tomorrow at 9 a.m. For more information, tap on the 97.3 ESPN app. You want to get a text in here? We got a couple minutes left. 609-403-0973. During the break, I was chatting it up with Hunter Brody. He'll be back, coming up next on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill at 2 o'clock. So I promised everybody that I would start watching the MLS. I promised Kincaid. I promised all of you listening. And I watched the majority of the game last night. I watched the first half this morning. By the way, the Philadelphia Union won this morning. Orlando City won last night. And my favorite takeaway from MLS is back is actually something that most people would probably think is innocuous. I love the hydration break. I think the stupidest thing with soccer on planet Earth is it's the only sport where you don't get a break naturally to hydrate. I never understood it. Listen, I went to a high school without football, so I gave soccer a chance. I played soccer for a couple years, and I never understood it, why if you're thirsty or you're tired or you get a cramp because you've been running around for 40 straight minutes, that you're considered a fill-in-the-blank derogatory name. I've always thought that was the dumbest thing in the world. Hockey players have shifts. Baseball players get a chance to catch a breather between innings. Basketball players have timeouts and fouls and out of bounds. Football has downs. You literally have break time between the down. Players get water during timeouts. Why is soccer the only sport that doesn't have a hydration break? I hope this hydration break becomes a thing. I think it's the greatest thing the MLS has ever done. They finally brought some reasonable sensibility to the dumbest thing in soccer. Hydration breaks need to stay. Because dude who says that you are a fill-in-the-blank derogatory name because you're tired or you're cramping because you ran around for 45 minutes, that guy needs to go. Hydration breaks need to stay. MLS got that right.